I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who checked her husband's phone. I was raised to believe that trust was the foundation of a marriage, that if you loved someone deeply enough and gave them everything you had, they would never give you a reason to doubt them. My mother used to say that suspicion was poison, that once you let it in, it would eat through everything you'd built together until there was nothing left but ashes. I believed her. For 11 years, I believed her completely. And then I found out that the poison had already been inside my house the whole time, wearing my sister-in-law's perfume and sleeping in my bed. Her name was Jolene. Richie's younger sister. She had been part of my life since the very beginning of my relationship with him, always there at family dinners, always the first one to hug me at holidays, always telling me how lucky she was to have me as a sister. She was the kind of woman who made you feel seen in a room full of people, who remembered every small detail you'd ever shared with her, your favorite coffee order, the name of your childhood dog, the song that played at your wedding. I adored her. That's the part that still takes my breath away when I think about it. I genuinely, completely adored her. Richie and I had met in our late 20s through mutual friends at a rooftop party in the summer. He was tall and quiet in that way that felt like depth rather than distance, and he laughed at all the right moments. We dated for 2 years before he proposed, got married in a small ceremony in the mountains with just close family, and moved into a house in the suburbs that we spent the first year filling with furniture and arguments about paint colors, and eventually a life that felt, from the outside, like everything I had ever wanted. We had our rough patches. Every marriage does. But I never had a reason to think the rough patches were hiding something catastrophic underneath. Richie was an architect. He worked long hours, but he always came home, always remembered our anniversary, always made coffee in the mornings before I was awake and left it on the counter for me with the exact right amount of cream. Those small consistencies were the language of our life together, the vocabulary I had built my sense of safety around. I worked in marketing for a regional healthcare company, and between the two of us we had built something stable and comfortable and real. Or so I believed. Jolene moved to our city about 4 years into our marriage. She said she needed a fresh start after a bad breakup, and Richie and I both welcomed her with open arms. We helped her find an apartment 20 minutes away, helped her move boxes up 3 flights of stairs on a hot Saturday in August, let her come over for dinner 2 or 3 times a week while she was getting settled. I liked having her close. She was funny and warm, and she made Richie light up in the way that only old family memories can, and watching them laugh together at the dinner table made me feel like I had married into something real and lasting. Jolene worked as a freelance graphic designer, which meant her schedule was flexible in ways that mine wasn't. She would drop by the house sometimes during the day when I was at the office, just to use the printer or raid the kitchen or sit in the backyard with a coffee. I never minded. I gave her a key. I trusted her the way you trust someone who is already family, the way you trust someone who has earned that trust over years of small kindnesses and shared history. The key was a gesture of love. I think about that key a lot now. The first sign that something was off was so small that I dismissed it before it even fully formed. Richie had started going to the gym more, which I thought was healthy, until I noticed the gym was always in the evenings, always on the nights I had my book club or my work dinners, or the nights I was simply tied up with something that kept me out of the house. I told myself I was being ridiculous. He was just prioritizing fitness. Men did that. It meant nothing. The second sign was a shift in how he talked about Jolene. He used to bring her up casually, the way you mention family, but somewhere along the way those mentions started coming with a kind of careful neutrality that I couldn't quite name. He stopped volunteering stories about her the way he used to. When I brought her up, his answers were short. Not cold, just clipped. Like he was managing something. I noticed it in the way you notice a change in air pressure before a storm. You can't see it, but your body registers it before your mind catches up. The third sign, the one I look back on with the most frustration at myself, was a Sunday afternoon when all 3 of us were together in the backyard for a barbecue. It was one of those easy, unhurried afternoons that feel like the best version of your life, and at one point I went inside to get more drinks and I was gone maybe 3 minutes. When I came back, Richie and Jolene were standing on the far side of the yard with their backs to the house, and something about the way they were standing, the angle of it, the proximity, the way they both shifted slightly when they heard the door, registered somewhere deep in my body as wrong before I had any conscious thought to attach to it. By the time I crossed the yard and handed them their drinks, they were already laughing about something, and the feeling dissolved so quickly that I convinced myself I had imagined it. I had not imagined it. I mentioned the vague unease to my friend Rebecca one afternoon over lunch, more as a passing observation than a real concern. Rebecca was the kind of friend who had known me long enough to hear the things I wasn't quite saying. She had the rare ability to hold space for a hard conversation without making it feel like an interrogation, and I had trusted her with the most honest parts of myself for over a decade. She looked at me across the table with an expression I didn't know how to read and told me to trust my gut. I told her my gut was probably just tired and changed the subject. She let me, but she kept her eyes on me the way she did when she was worried, and I filed that look away in the back of my mind where I kept all the things I wasn't ready to look at directly. The weeks that followed were outwardly normal. Richie and I went to dinner with friends. We talked about renovating the kitchen. We made plans to visit his parents for the holidays. I bought new curtains for the living room and spent a Saturday afternoon hanging them while Richie sat on the couch watching football and handed me tools when I asked for them. It was such an ordinary afternoon. I replay it sometimes and marvel at how completely I did not know what was happening inside my own home. Jolene called me the week before everything fell apart. She wanted to have lunch, just the two of us, and I remember being happy about it, looking forward to it the way I always looked forward to time with her. We went to a little Italian place near her apartment that we both loved, and she was warm and funny and she asked about my job and my mother and remembered that I had mentioned a difficult project at work 2 weeks earlier and asked how it had resolved. That was Jolene. Always remembering. Always attentive. I drove home from that lunch feeling grateful for her. The following Thursday I found out the truth. The night I found out, I wasn't even looking. That's the thing nobody tells you about betrayal, sometimes it doesn't require investigation. Sometimes it just falls into your hands like something that was always going to happen, like the universe got tired of waiting for you to catch up. I had come home early from a work event that ran shorter than expected. The house was dark except for the light in the kitchen, and Richie's car was in the driveway along with a car I recognized immediately as Jolene's. I remember feeling a small, uncomplicated warmth at the idea of them hanging out, maybe watching a movie or talking over the leftover pasta I'd made 2 nights before. I came in through the side door quietly because I didn't want to startle anyone and I set my bag down on the bench in the hallway and I heard voices from upstairs. I don't need to describe what I found. You already know. The part that I keep returning to, even now, even after everything, is not the image itself but the sound of my own voice saying Jolene's name like a question, like some part of me still needed confirmation, like the evidence in front of me wasn't enough because my brain simply refused to accept it as real. 11 years of loving someone, 4 years of loving his sister like my own, and my mind's first response was to ask for clarification. As if there was some version of this that made sense. She looked at me with an expression I will never forget. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't even shame, not immediately. It was something closer to resignation, like she had known this moment was coming and had spent a long time rehearsing for it, and now that it was here she was just waiting for the scene to play out. There was something almost relieved in her face, and that relief hurt me in a way that nothing else about that night did, because it meant she had been carrying the secret for long enough that exposure felt like a release. Richie said my name. I turned and walked back down the stairs. I sat in my car in the driveway for 40 minutes. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I just sat there in the dark watching the light in the bedroom window and feeling the architecture of my entire adult life quietly rearrange itself into something I didn't recognize. I thought about the coffee he left on the counter every morning. I thought about the Sunday barbecue. I thought about the key I had given her, the key I had handed over as an act of love, and I thought about all the times I had come home to a house that felt exactly as I had left it but had not been, all the times the ordinary surface of my life had been a screen behind which something else entirely was happening. Richie came out eventually. He was dressed, his hair still disheveled, and he stood outside the driver's side window with the expression of a man who knows he has no defense and is deciding how much of the truth to give. I rolled down the window. He started talking. He said it had been going on for 7 months. He said it had started when they ran into each other at the gym I had told myself meant nothing, and that it had never meant what we had meant, as if the comparative scale of his betrayal was supposed to be comforting. He said he had been trying to end it. He said he didn't know how things had gotten so far. He said he was sorry. He said it more than once, in different configurations, as if rearranging the words might make them land differently. The word dissolved in the air between us like it was made of nothing. I asked him one question. I asked him if Jolene had been in my house, in my bedroom, on the days she had come over alone while I was at work. He didn't answer right away, and the pause was its own answer. I rolled up the window and backed out of the driveway. I drove to Rebecca's house that night. She opened the door before I could knock, still in her pajamas, and she took one look at my face and pulled me inside without a word. She made tea and she sat across from me at her kitchen table and she let me talk, and then she let me not talk, and she didn't once say I told you so, even though she had, in her way, and I loved her for that more than I had words to express. At one point, very late, when I had run out of things to say and was just sitting with the enormity of it, she reached across the table and put her hand over mine and didn't say anything at all, and that silence was the most comforting thing anyone had offered me in years. I stayed at Rebecca's for 4 days. She cleared out her guest room, lent me clothes, brought home groceries, and fielded calls from Richie on my behalf with a calm efficiency that I will be grateful for until I die. On the 3rd day, Jolene showed up at Rebecca's door. I don't know how she found out I was there. Richie must have told her. I was in the kitchen when Rebecca answered the door, and I heard Jolene's voice asking if she could come in, and I heard Rebecca, in the most measured and devastating tone I have ever heard her use, tell her that she could not, and that she should not come back. The door closed. I stood in the kitchen with my hands wrapped around a mug of coffee and I listened to the sound of Jolene's car pulling away and I felt something inside me go very, very quiet. The next several weeks were a particular kind of misery that I can only describe as administrative grief. There were lawyers to call and accounts to separate and a house to figure out and a whole network of shared friends and family members who had to be told or who found out on their own and reacted in the full range of ways that people react to a story like this. Some people were unambiguously on my side. Some people tried to stay neutral, which I understood intellectually but found I had very little patience for in practice. Neutrality in the face of a clear wrong felt to me like a choice, just a quiet one. Some people, a few, seemed to feel that the situation was complicated in ways I wasn't acknowledging, and those people fell out of my life with a clean, almost painless finality that surprised me. Richie's mother called me 10 days after I moved back into the house. She cried. She said she was horrified. She said she didn't know, and I believed her, because she was a woman who had never in my experience been able to conceal her feelings about anything. She asked if she could still be in my life and I told her honestly that I didn't know yet, that I needed time, and she said she understood and that she would wait. Richie's father never called, which told me everything I needed to know about where the family lines would be drawn. His silence was a kind of answer, and I accepted it as one. Jolene sent me a text 11 days after I found out. It was long and carefully written, the kind of message that takes many drafts and several days and probably a therapist's input, full of phrases like I know there's nothing I can say and I carry this with me every day and I hope someday you'll know how much I truly loved you as a sister. I read it once, slowly, from beginning to end. Then I set my phone down on the kitchen counter and I went for a long walk through the neighborhood, past all the ordinary houses with their ordinary lives inside them, and I walked until the tightness in my chest loosened enough to breathe through, and when I came back I picked up the phone and deleted the message without responding. Whatever she was carrying, she could carry it without my help. I had my own weight to manage. What I did not expect, in the middle of all of it, was my own resilience. That sounds like something you'd read on a motivational poster and roll your eyes at, and I say it anyway because it is true and because I think we don't say it plainly enough. I expected to fall apart completely. I had never been through anything like this and I assumed, the way you assume before the worst things happen, that I would not be able to handle it, that the loss of Richie and the loss of Jolene at the same time would be more than I was built for. But there is something clarifying about a betrayal of that magnitude, something that burns away everything that was already weak or pretended or held together with wishful thinking, and leaves the structure of who you actually are standing in the open air. I found out who I was when the scaffolding came down. I found out I was stronger than the life I had been living. That wasn't something Richie or Jolene could ever take from me, no matter how long they had been lying. I filed for divorce 6 weeks after that night. My lawyer, a sharp and unhurried woman named Patricia who had clearly heard every version of this story before and was bothered by none of them, advised me on my options with a calm practicality that I found enormously grounding. Richie did not contest anything in the way I had feared he might. I think the guilt had a weight he couldn't fully carry, and acquiescing to my terms was the only currency of accountability he had left. I got the house, a fair division of our shared accounts, and my own name back on my own life. It felt, on the day everything was finalized, less like an ending and more like a door finally opening. I didn't particularly want the house at first. All those rooms full of everything we had chosen together, every piece of furniture with a story attached to it, every corner associated with a memory I now had to reframe or release. Rebecca pointed out that wanting to run from a place was itself a reason to stay, that reclaiming a space was its own kind of power and its own kind of statement. She was right. I stayed. I repainted the bedroom a deep, warm color that Richie had always said was too dark and I found was exactly right. I replaced the furniture in the living room. I ripped out the garden in the backyard that had never really been tended and planted one of my own, tomatoes and lavender and a climbing rose along the back fence, things Richie had always said were too much work and that I discovered were not too much work at all. The garden became something I looked forward to every morning. It still is. I heard through mutual connections, about 8 months later, that Richie and Jolene had stopped seeing each other not long after everything fell apart. That the relationship, the one that had cost so much, had not survived the exposure. I won't pretend I didn't feel something when I heard that. I'm human and I had loved Richie for 11 years and there is a particular bitterness in learning that the thing that destroyed your life was not even durable enough to replace it. But I noticed that the bitterness lasted about 30 seconds before it dissolved into something flatter, something close to indifference, and that indifference felt like the truest measure of how far I had come from the woman sitting in that dark driveway. Rebecca threw me a birthday party that year, the first one I'd had in a long time that felt entirely like mine. She filled her backyard with people who had made their choice clearly and without hesitation, people who had shown up not because they didn't know what had happened but because they did, and had decided anyway that I was worth showing up for. There was food and music and the kind of laughter that comes from people who have known each other through real things. At one point, somewhere in the middle of the evening, I looked around at all of it, the light strung between the trees, the warmth and noise of people who genuinely loved me, and I felt something settle in my chest that I can only describe as peace. Not happiness exactly, not yet, but something underneath happiness, something more durable. The ground beneath my feet felt solid in a way it hadn't in years. I think about what I would say to the version of myself who was sitting in that driveway, watching the light in the bedroom window, trying to make sense of a world that had just tilted completely off its axis. I would tell her that the grief is real and the anger is justified and none of it is her fault. I would tell her that she is going to be surprised by who shows up and who doesn't, and that both surprises are information. I would tell her that the house is going to feel like hers again, that the garden is going to grow, that there will come a morning when she wakes up and her first thought is not about any of this, and that morning comes sooner than she thinks. Richie and Jolene had counted on my ignorance to hold everything together. They had built something between them on the foundation of my not knowing, which meant the entire thing was only ever as stable as my unawareness. And the moment that unawareness ended, so did everything they had constructed on top of it. Their story collapsed the night I walked upstairs. Mine simply continued, and then slowly, stubbornly, against every expectation I had of myself, it became something better than what it had been before. Not because of what they did to me. In spite of it. That distinction matters more than I can say.